Hello my friends, Mr. E here, and today we're going to be talking about this keystone right here, Power Overload, and what it actually does and how good it is. Because when I recently did my every talent in the entire Skitari talent tree tier list sort of video, this one I rated a lot lower than the other keystones, and I felt bad after the fact because I realized that I have not actually looked at the numbers. I've not actually sat down and crunched the numbers and figured out how effective is this? Like, does it actually, have a really sizable impact and I'm just missing it. So I wanted to go through what this keystone can do and sort of prescribe whether or not it's good or what builds it might work with, etc., etc., so you can be better influenced. And there's also going to be a build that I'll be using this on, hopefully by tomorrow. So this keystone here, what does it do? Well, every time you kill an enemy or an ally in coherency with you kills an enemy, you get a stack. If it's an elite or a specialist, and one would have to assume also probably a boss, even though it doesn't specify, that you'll get 2 stacks. So when you reach 30 stacks, so either 30 normal kills or 15 elite kills or some combination thereof, then you will get to overload. And that overload will trigger automatically for the next 8 seconds. You and allies in coherency with you, when it triggered, will get 15% damage and 15% toughness damage reduction. Now, I actually don't know if like you overloading and then walking near allies after the fact to like go in coherency would share the buff, but I would assume not. I assume it just gives it to everyone who's in coherency when the buff goes off. So that on its at a baseline is pretty weak. If you consider it as compared to cleansing protocols down here, cleansing protocols gives you, just to start the game, 15% toughness damage reduction and 15% damage the entire game long. Yes, you can lose stacks. However, the typical experience with it is that you can only lose stacks by taking damage. So if you're killing stuff, you're going to keep at maximum stacks. This, you have to build up to 30 stacks, and then it has an 8-second buff, and then it's off. And that means you have to be consistently in the fray. You have to be around your allies and around enemies to fight and kill and get those stacks. And only then are you going to get the buff. So I played some games with this and I wrote down my results. I tallied up all of my overloads and how quickly I got the stacks and stuff. And I found that on average between my games where I was playing sort of a normal-ish build with it, I think I was playing Shivtari. Yes, I played the knife Shivtari from the other day, basically, but I put Power Overload in there instead of doing cleansing protocols, and I found that on average, I was getting about 1 overload every 20 seconds or so. So that's pretty good, and I was playing on Havoc 26 in order to get this footage, in order to do these testings, because I figured that's not as crazy dense as Havoc 40 is. Obviously, on Havoc 40, this keystone will generate more value because the more dense enemies are, the better this keystone is, as we'll talk about in a second. But for the most players, most players are not playing on Havoc 40, so I would say that Havoc 26 is a lot closer to the average experience of players, and I wanted to kind of bridge that gap between like, okay, how effective is this going to be in a Havoc game versus, Auric or whatever else. So I think that 1 every 20 seconds is probably about the average. And I was playing right in coherency with my allies. We were getting lots of kills, right? It was definitely, we were definitely producing a lot of stacks. So with that being said, what does that translate to for this baseline keystone? Well, it means that you're getting 8 seconds of uptime every 20 seconds because it can stack while it's active, right? And that's about a 40% uptime. So 40% of 15% damage and 15% toughness damage reduction is basically giving you an average of 6% damage and 6% toughness damage reduction for the entire game, over the course of the game, right? That's okay. That's something. It's not very good, but hey, listen, this is just the start of the keystone. Obviously, the other stuff out here is going to change it a lot. The next really big one that changes it is critical power overload. And this one is a electrocution debuff that applies to enemies when you overload, and it makes them, first of all, be electrocuted, and they will then take 15% more damage for 8 seconds. So this little buff right here, what this does is it gives you, first of all, you're getting a buff to your damage from the baseline. That's going to happen at the same time that this happens, and this will pulse out. And now the thing that people don't understand is that this electrocution is not a paralyzing sort of electrocution, and that's why I ranked it pretty poorly in my one build or my, what was I talking about? Like the talent tree thing, because it's just not going to give you the effect you'd expect, right? It's going to probably disappoint you, because when you get a bunch of kills, and let's go ahead and demonstrate it here. I can spawn 20 of these guys. I'll spawn a big pile. Is this the Mark III? Sure is. So now I can just go ahead and do this. So watch these enemies right here. Okay. So see that shocking? See how they're not paralyzed like that? That is the effect that it'll give you. It gives you that electrocution, which is good. However, it's not comparable to something like Electrostrike Conduit's shock, which will, when I crit an enemy here, see how he's paralyzed like that? He can't move. He can't do anything for that duration. So that's not that same sort of paralysis. It'll still give you electrocution debuffs, but there's like 4 or 5 different types of electrocution in the game for whatever reason, and it's not the one that you'd expect where it will stun stuff around you. So that does make it a lot weaker than it appears on paper. However, you know, it's 15% more damage to the enemies that get hit by it, and they are constantly electrocuted, which does have like benefits elsewhere. However, let's go ahead and just evaluate the base damage increase that this can give you. So when this is triggered, if you have this triggered, this is automatically triggering in effect, right? So if you're in melee with enemies, let's go ahead and like get a power sword or something here. So we'll test. Okay, 222 on just a regular ass chest stab. 238. Why is it doing more? Oh, it's the charges for the sword. Hold on, we gotta wait for the sword to power up. Okay, here we go. 255. Okay, so that's our normal. And now let's spawn in some groaners for ourselves and get up a little power overload here. Okay, so now this guy is electrocuted. I keep hitting heads. There we go, 345. Okay, so it went from 255 to 345. We gained 90 damage, and that is about 35% extra damage. And that makes sense, right? Because we gain 15% damage, and this guy takes 15% extra damage, but those are multiplied by each other, right? Because the extra 15 that we do is going to be multiplied when it hits him. So yeah, that's pretty good, right? If you increase all of your damage to everyone around you by 35%, everybody within 8 meters, they're now electrified. They're going to take 35%. You know, you're going to increase your damage by 35%. That's pretty good. So that is going to happen roughly every 20 seconds for 8 seconds, a 40% uptime, and a 40% uptime on a 35% damage increase is like what? 13, 15%? Hold on, I can calculate it real quick. We'll do 35 times 0.4. Okay, it's 14%. You know, it's a 14% increase in terms of damage if you are in melee. And this is where I want to start pointing out that this Keystone, it gets a lot of power from this one right here. And I would say that being in melee is the #1 way that this Keystone generates value. Being close to enemies, and therefore also generally being close to your allies, the time where you fall out of coherency with your allies the most is when you are ranged attacking. So if you're shooting with a galvanic rifle or something, do not choose this Keystone, because you're not going to be in coherency with your allies, therefore they're not going to get power overload, and you're not going to be close enough to enemies to give them the shock, even though the shock is kind of a big range. It's 8 meters, which is... that's 7... yes, it's like right here. So I should still be able to hit him at that range. Yeah, so I still hit him there. And yeah, you can see they get a 15% damage taken increase. So yeah, pretty nice to be able to get that. And that means that, yeah, you want to be close to enemies, close-ish to enemies, right? About that close. And you want to be close to your allies, which means it's going to be much preferred to be playing on a melee build when you're using this power overload. Okay, let's go into the next one, Invigorating Overload. You and allies in coherency restore 20% toughness and 20% stamina when the overload occurs. This, I still contend, is pretty bad. I played a game with it, and I generally couldn't notice any time where this triggered and was useful in any way. Because you have to think about it. What is this on average, right? Every 20 seconds, this is going to trigger when the overload triggers. And that means that every second, on average, you're getting 1% toughness and 1% stamina. That's not that great. And even if it was distributed across the 20 seconds equally, it still wouldn't be very good. But the problem is that if you are full on stamina or already full on toughness, it does nothing. Yes, it applies it to you and allies in coherency, but I find that the amount of times where this triggers and your allies are actually missing anything there is pretty low, and these are pretty ineffectual stats that you probably wouldn't care about a whole lot anyway. Definitely not worth the point because guitar has so many other good points. But the next one up here is called static capacitor drain. This one 100% is worth the point because this is generally why people want to take this Keystone. Static capacitor drain, every time you overload, you're going to build stacks, and you're building stacks to 8, 16, and 24 stacks. And you get 15% damage when you reach 8, you get 16 or you get 20% toughness damage reduction when you reach 16, and then you get 25% bonus capacitance generation when you overload 24 times. And this will last until you die. So it's incumbent upon you to not die, right? If you are capable of doing that, right? If you're capable of getting this early on and then not dying the rest of the game, it'll generate a lot of value because now you don't just have the roughly what is this, 6% toughness damage reduction on average here, an average of 13 or 14% damage increase from this, together. And then you've got another 15% that you keep all game long, and 20% toughness damage reduction that you keep all game long, and 25% capacitance generation that you keep all game long without any requirements like Redline Capacitors has of continuing to use charges, etc., which can really, really multiply your generation a lot. So this is a very, very strong one if you can avoid dying, which is pretty easy to do, I'd say. And that is really good, but we have to see how fast can this stack, right? So if we take the average that we had so far, if we were overloading one time every 20 seconds, this is, by the way, in combat, then you're going to reach the capacitance overload thing at about 8 minutes into the game, right? That means that you need to start stacking, and then you'll reach that at 8 minutes into the game. And therefore, the longer the game goes, the longer you can stay alive, and the longer the game goes on for, the better this is, because the portion of time where you were charging it up is going to be much, much less. So yeah, if this only takes you, because it's going to take you roughly 8 times 20 is 160 seconds. So that's a little bit less than 3 minutes to get 15% damage. If that only takes you 1/10 of the game, you get that 15% damage thing for, that's like an average of 13 or 14% the entire game, right? You only had a little bit of time where you didn't have it. Same thing applies to the other ones. So let me show you what the difference is here. Now, I gotta overload this a bunch of times now. Here we go. Let's spawn a bunch of groaners. Am I gonna crash the game doing this? Who knows? Jesus fucking Christ. How many stacks did that give me? 7. We're at 16 stacks. Okay. I guess we could stop there. The capacitance generation isn't really that important. But now what we want to do is we want to see, okay, what is our damage increase to? So before it was 255 and 345 when we poked the guy. So now our base damage is 293. That's from the extra 15% that we got off of those getting the 8 stacks. And then if we do our overload here, we're gonna do a couple more of these. Yup. Oh, that was not enough. Yup. There we go. And now we're hitting for 398. Pretty good, right? 398. So yeah, a big increase. So we went from a situation where we were doing 255 to 398, which is 398, 255. Is 56% extra damage, because our extra 15% damage that got applied to us is now applying to even more, because they're taking more damage from us. So that's really, really good, right? That's a big increase that you keep all game long. And just think about this, right? Getting just a 16 stacks immediately puts this here on par with what Flensing can give you, because Flensing can give you 15% damage and 15% toughness damage reduction. If you take another node down here, it can increase to 8, which will give you 20 and 20, right? So this is going to put you pretty high up. And then at 24 stacks, you get 25% capacitance generation, which multiplies every source of capacitance generation. So your base generation goes from 2 to 2.5 generation per second. This extra 1% would be 1.25 instead, etc., etc. And most notably, Chord Claw Strike over here, this 25% would instead restore 32.5%, right? So all that gets multiplied, which is really, really powerful. And that feeds into the last part of the Keystone called Power Drive. 5 stacks for each charge spent. And this is how you generate your charges here. It's like an engine where when you are generating more capacitance, you can use those to use your abilities. And when you spend charges on your abilities, you'll get stacks for this ability. So if we use a Cord Claw Strike, that spends 1 charge, right? And that'll give us 5 stacks here. So every time we use our ability, it's counting as if we got 5 kills on regular enemies or something like that. And so in order to figure out like how effective this is, I had to go back and I ran the games I ran. I did use all 3 of these, and this one therefore was increasing these. So you have to assume the 20 seconds that I had for the general stack time and the speed at which I was able to stack this up was directly related to the fact that I had power drive. But how important was power drive in that? I had to go back and figure out basically how much capacitance did I generate, how many charges did I make, and therefore how many charges did I spend in order to get those stacks up. So what I found was that over the course of the game that I played, I generated about 67 charges. And that was in 20 minutes because I had a good amount of charge generation. I think I had this one, and yeah, I think that was it. Most notably though, 5 stacks for each charge spent does not apply to New Spheric, so there is an anti-synergy here. Do not use New Spheric with this because you'll use some of your capacitance and it will not give you credit for a charge. So yeah, that is going to actually give you about, on average, I found, it's about 20% additional to your power overload stacking here. And that can be taken even further. If you're absolutely maximizing the amount of capacitance you can generate, you can build this up like 25% faster, maybe even 30% faster if you're playing pretty optimally, making certain that you're, getting every bit of capacitance that you can all the time. And that means that something like Cord Claw Strike here is very, very good with this because you can get some of its capacitance back. So there's like a big discount on Cord Claw Strike, meaning you can use charges pretty cheaply. And that is also, this talent is also pretty good because since you get a bunch of stacks immediately when you use the ability, you get 5 stacks immediately if you use Cord Claw, or like if you use Voltaic Emitter at 3 stacks, you get 15 immediately. That would mean that you would immediately jump up a bunch in stacks, and therefore you might overload at the same time. So you can kind of like get close to the thing, and then when you use an ult, you'll do the overload stuff, which could definitely like set you up for some good times, because you'll generally only use your ults when you're in combat, right? And this will therefore only be triggering in combat. And so yeah, that's pretty good. This overall gave me about 20% extra generation, which means that if I hadn't had it, it would have probably taken me about 25 seconds on average to get an extra charge, and therefore my static capacitor drain would have taken probably around like 10 or 11 minutes to fully stack up to that 24 stacks. So this is definitely a worthwhile talent to get, and it will get you to the stacks faster and increase your uptime on these buffs for the rest of the game. So yeah, really, very good. So I would recommend these 3 here with it. So in like retrospect, is this any good and what should you build it with? Well, yeah, I'd say it actually is very good. Not very good, but it's good. It is definitely good. It doesn't have as well-rounded a application as the other Keystones do, whereas Redline Capacitors can work with just about anything because using abilities gives you strength and more charges, and getting toughness back and having baseline toughness generation and capacitance generation is really strong. And the same thing goes with Flensing down here, where just getting a baseline of damage and toughness damage reduction and more crit, which is one of the only places you can get attack speed and crit, and getting immediate capacitance back on elite and specialist kills, those are very strong. This one has a little bit more of a niche where it fits better with weapons that deal with electrified stuff. So if I wanted to maximize the value of this Keystone, if I wanted to build maximally around it, first of all, I need to lean into the fact that I get more use out of this Keystone the more capacitance I generate, and therefore I want to get a lot of capacitance nodes. I want to get a node like this on Satiated Steel because I'm going to get more capacitance back out of that. And this will also help me build my stacks faster. So I'll get to that 15% damage threshold faster. I'll get to the 20% damage reduction threshold faster and really, really buff it up. And then you definitely also want to take nodes like these up here, System Shock, Weakness Analysis Doctrine, and Retribution Conduit, because enemies are going to be electrocuted when you're nearby. So we can demonstrate what the difference is here. If I do a little swipey on this guy, right? So he takes 1441 on a regular claw that I hit him in the head there. Okay, 1620. All right, so that's how much we deal with just the 8 base stacks. But what if I overload and make him vulnerable too? Because that will then give a bunch of like shock stacks to him, and he should be taking extra damage from being electrocuted, etc. So we'll try that out. So now he's overloaded, and we jump to 2190, right, on a slash there. So yeah, that's about a 50% damage increase to have the shock and that all apply at the same time. Definitely a really big impact. And what I've found is that, yeah, when you have this debuff, because these debuffs are so widespread, if you're in melee with this sort of with this sort of build, the enemies are going to take so much increased damage from this buffing you, and from the brittleness that's applied, from weakness analysis doctrine. You've got a lot of stacking buffs going, so it really pushes things like Horde Claw Strike like way up in terms of damage. And this is a great pairing with this ability because it's melee focused and it guarantees a crit, which is good for Electro Strike Conduit and generally, like, you know, boosting regeneration. It's also going to generate capacitance, so I think a build like that's really good. And then you definitely also probably want to use something like Shock Maul here, because again, since this Keystone is going to be electrocuting enemies passively around you, high voltage is a very valuable blessing here. However, also Arc Maul would be incredibly good here, because Arc Maul will arc extra times, or will arc faster off of already electrocuted enemies. So both of these have like really high strengths into this. But I would highly recommend that you run a build that can benefit from the electrocution damage, and that it is melee focused, because yeah, melee focused builds are going to get the most benefit out of overloading this and being close to these enemies to capitalize on the damage. And yeah, so that's what I have to say about this Keystone. I hope it helps you understand where it fits. If I were to re-rank it now, I would say that this Keystone on its face, just the Keystone itself, is like B tier. It's okay, you know, it provides a buff to you and allies, which is decent, but it's not up very often. This up here it's probably B tier. I probably bump it up a little bit, because it does apply electrocution, which has a good amount of synergies with the tree, even though it doesn't electrify and like actually paralyze enemies. I think it should at least do like a 1 second electrification, if I'm being honest. Static capacitor drain is like A tier, or maybe even S tier in terms of the Keystone behind it, or the Keystone modifier behind it. Probably S tier, right? That's a ton of benefits if you can get this up, and it doesn't take very long. On my maximized build, this one right here, where I maximize for this power overload stuff, I got this up to 24 stacks within 6 minutes of starting the game. And that means that like there was a 1 minute downtime at the start, so like a 5 minute to race to get this fully stacked up is incredible. And then power drive here, I'd probably say this is like B tier, because it does increase your generation by like 20%, but it's not all that crazy. But yeah, and this is still like D, because that's just not going to be useful to really anybody. But yeah, that's how I see this Keystone, guys, and hopefully it helps you to make better builds with it, and look forward to my build with it tomorrow, and I hope to see you then. Thanks for watching, guys. Mystery out. Bye bye.